They say laughter is the best medicine, but some jokes cut so deep they leave scars on your soul. My name is Margaret Thompson, though everyone calls me Maggie. And for 58 years I believed that kindness and generosity would always be returned in equal measure. I thought that opening your heart and home to family meant they would cherish and protect that sacred space. I was devastatingly wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment I realized just how little my own family respected me wasn't when they forgot my birthday, or when they asked me to babysit every weekend without a word of thanks. It was when my daughter-in-law Amanda looked me dead in the eye, handed me a bowl of what I thought was a new gourmet stew, and watched with barely concealed glee as I took bite after bite of premium dog food she had heated up and seasoned to mask the taste. The humiliation of that moment, the taste still lingering in my mouth as Amanda doubled over with laughter and called her mother to share the hilarious prank she had just pulled on the old woman, was nothing compared to what came next. Because that was the day I discovered that the gentle, accommodating Maggie Thompson had died somewhere along the way, and in her place stood a woman who was about to serve the most satisfying dish of all: cold, hard consequences. Growing up in a working-class family in Riverside, Texas, I learned early that respect was something you earned through dedication, hard work, and treating others with dignity. My parents, both factory workers at the old textile plant, instilled in me the belief that family came first, that you sacrificed for those you loved, and that a woman's worth was measured by how well she cared for others. These lessons shaped every decision I made for the next 4 decades, from my choice to become an elementary school teacher, to my unwavering commitment to putting my family's needs before my own. I met Frank Thompson during my first year teaching at Riverside Elementary. He was the school's maintenance supervisor, a quiet man with calloused hands and the kindest brown eyes I had ever seen. While other women my age were chasing lawyers and businessmen, I was drawn to Frank's steady presence, his gentle humor, and the way he treated every person he met with the same respect, whether they were the principal or the newest janitor. We married after a 2-year courtship that felt like something out of a fairy tale, complete with picnics by the Riverside Creek and long walks through the town square on Sunday afternoon. Our modest ranch house on Oak Avenue became my sanctuary, a place where Frank and I built a life filled with simple pleasures and shared dreams. The house itself wasn't much to look at: 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a kitchen that had seen better days, but it was our. Frank spent weekends fixing whatever broke, painting rooms in cheerful colors I chose, and slowly transforming our little corner of Riverside into something special. We planted rose bushes in the front yard, built a vegetable garden in the back, and filled every room with second-hand furniture that we refinished together on quiet evenings. When David was born after 3 years of trying, we felt like the luckiest people alive. He was a beautiful baby with Frank's dark hair and my stubborn streak, and from the moment the doctor placed him in my arms, I knew that this tiny person would be the center of my universe. Frank took extra shifts to make sure I could stay home with David during his first year, and I threw myself into motherhood with the same dedication I brought to everything else in my life. David was an easy child in many ways, curious and affectionate, with a quick smile that could melt the hardest heart. But he was also prone to respiratory infections that sent us rushing to Riverside General Hospital in the middle of the night, and by the time he was 5, it was clear that his health issues were more serious than we had initially thought. The specialist diagnosed him with chronic asthma complicated by severe allergies, conditions that would require careful monitoring, expensive medications, and frequent doctor visits for years to come. The financial strain was immediate and overwhelming. Frank's salary as a maintenance supervisor, combined with my teacher's pay, had been adequate for our simple lifestyle, but David's medical needs changed everything. Insurance covered some of the costs, but the co-pays, specialist fees, and prescription medications quickly drained our modest savings. I began tutoring students after school to bring in extra money, and Frank took on weekend projects for neighbors, fixing everything from leaky faucets to broken air conditioners. Despite the challenges, those early years with David were some of the happiest of my life. Frank and I worked together seamlessly, taking turns staying up with David during particularly bad asthma attacks, driving him to appointments, and researching every possible treatment option. We celebrated every small milestone: the first night David slept through without coughing, the first soccer game he could play without needing his inhaler, the gradual improvement that came with age and better medication. Frank was an extraordinary father, patient and gentle even during the most stressful moments. He never missed one of David's school plays or soccer games, even when it meant leaving work early or rearranging his schedule. He helped with homework every night, built elaborate science fair projects, and spent countless hours teaching David to throw a baseball despite his breathing difficulties. More importantly, he modeled the kind of man I hoped David would become: honest, hardworking, and devoted to his family. When David turned 12, we faced our biggest medical crisis yet. What started as a routine cold quickly escalated into pneumonia that landed him in the pediatric intensive care unit for 6 days. I barely left the hospital during that time, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs and surviving on vending machine coffee while Frank juggled his work responsibilities and tried to keep our household running. The medical bills from that hospitalization were staggering, even with insurance, and we found ourselves facing a choice between David's health and our financial stability. There was never really a choice to make. Frank took out a second mortgage on the house, and I began working summer school and weekend tutoring sessions to help pay down the debt. We canceled our modest vacation plans, postponed needed repairs on the house, and tightened our budget in every possible way. But David recovered completely, and that was all that mattered. Frank used to joke that we might be poor, but we were rich in the things that truly counted: health, love, and the knowledge that we would do anything for each other. Those words proved prophetic in ways neither of us could have imagined. When David was 16 and finally healthy enough to participate in school sports without restriction, Frank was diagnosed with a rare form of heart disease that had been silently progressing for years. The irony was cruel and inescapable. Just as our son's health stabilized, my husband's began to fail. Frank approached his illness with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything else. He continued working as long as he physically could, determined not to burden our family with additional financial stress. He attended every one of David's football games that season, cheering from the stands even when he needed to use oxygen between plays. He finished the kitchen renovation he had started before his diagnosis, working slowly but steadily to complete the project he had promised me years earlier. The last 2 years of Frank's life were a masterclass in grace under pressure. He organized all our financial documents, taught me how to handle household repairs he had always managed, and spent countless hours with David, sharing stories and wisdom he wanted to pass down. He never complained about the pain or the gradual loss of his strength. Instead, he focused on making sure David and I would be prepared for whatever came next. Frank passed away on a Thursday morning in November, 2 weeks after David's 18th birthday. He died peacefully at home, surrounded by the people he loved most in a house filled with nearly 2 decades of shared memory. The grief was overwhelming, a physical weight that made it difficult to breathe, but even in my darkest moments, I knew that Frank had given us the greatest gift possible: a foundation of love strong enough to survive anything. The funeral was a testament to the man Frank had been. The church was packed with colleagues, former students whose lives he had touched, neighbors whose problems he had quietly solved, and friends who had been drawn to his gentle spirit. David spoke beautifully about his father, sharing memories that made people laugh and cry in equal measure. I was so proud of my son that day, seeing glimpses of Frank's character already emerging in this young man we had raised together. The months following Frank's death were a blur of practical necessities mixed with profound grief. The life insurance policy Frank had maintained provided enough to cover his medical bills and funeral expenses, but it left little cushion for the future. I threw myself into work with renewed intensity, taking on additional responsibilities at school and expanding my tutoring services to include test preparation and summer remedial programs. David, meanwhile, threw himself into his senior year with determination that both impressed and worried me. He maintained his honor roll status while working part-time at a local grocery store, saving money for college and trying to lighten the financial burden he knew I was carrying. We had long conversations about his future, and I was relieved when he decided to attend Riverside Community College for his first 2 years before transferring to a 4-year university. It would save us thousands of dollars and allow him to continue living at home while he figured out his academic direction. Those 2 years at the community college were precious time for both of us. David excelled in his computer science courses, discovering a natural aptitude for programming that excited him in ways I hadn't seen since before Frank's illness. I enjoyed having him home, cooking dinner together, watching movies on weekend nights, and gradually adjusting to our new dynamic as a family of two. We talked about Frank often, sharing memories and keeping his presence alive in our daily lives. When David was accepted to Texas Tech University with a partial scholarship, I was thrilled for him but heartbroken at the prospect of an empty house. We spent his last summer at home working on projects Frank had never finished, painting the guest bedroom, updating the landscaping, and organizing years of accumulated belongings. It felt like a way of honoring Frank's memory while preparing for the next chapter of our lives. David's freshman year at Tech was everything we had hoped it would be. He loved his courses, made friends easily, and called home regularly to share his experiences. I visited him twice that first semester, marveling at how mature and confident he had become. The shy, sickly child who had once needed constant monitoring had transformed into a young man who could handle whatever challenges came his way. It was during David's sophomore year that he met Amanda Rodriguez, and from his first phone call about her I could hear something different in his voice. He talked about her constantly, her intelligence, her ambition, her beauty, her plans to work in marketing after graduation. She was studying business at Tech, came from a wealthy family in San Antonio, and according to David, was everything he had ever dreamed of in a partner. When he brought her home for Thanksgiving that year, I understood immediately what had captured my son's heart. Amanda was stunning with glossy black hair, perfect makeup, and a wardrobe that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in an entire year. She was polite and charming during her visit, complimenting my cooking and asking thoughtful questions about my teaching career. But there was something in her eyes when she looked around our modest home, a slight coolness that made me wonder what she really thought about our simple lifestyle. David was completely smitten, and I tried to focus on his happiness rather than my own reservation. He had been through so much loss and difficulty in his young life, and if Amanda made him smile the way he did when he talked about her, then I was determined to welcome her into our family. I pushed aside my concerns about the obvious differences in their backgrounds, and focused on getting to know the woman who had captured my son's heart. Over the next year, as their relationship grew more serious, I learned more about Amanda and her family. Her father, Robert, owned Rodriguez Auto Group, a chain of successful car dealerships throughout South Texas, and her mother, Linda, was actively involved in the social scene of San Antonio's wealthy elite. Amanda had grown up attending private schools, spending summers at the family's lake house, and taking European vacations that David described with a mixture of awe and longing. The contrast between our families became even more apparent when David brought Amanda home for Christmas during his junior year. She arrived with presents that were beautifully wrapped and clearly expensive, and I felt embarrassed by my own modest gifts in comparison. She was gracious about everything, but I noticed how carefully she avoided sitting on our older furniture and how she used her own expensive hand lotion rather than the simple soap in our guest bathroom. Despite these small signs, Amanda seemed to genuinely care for David, and he was happier than I had seen him since before Frank's death. They talked about their future together with the kind of certainty that only young love can produce, making plans to move to Austin after graduation, where they both hoped to find jobs in their respective fields. I listened to their dreams with a mixture of joy and sadness, happy for David, but already missing the close relationship we had maintained since Frank's passing. When David graduated summa cum laude with his computer science degree, I was overwhelmed with pride. Frank would have been so proud to see our son walk across that stage, and I felt his presence with me as I cheered from the audience. Amanda's entire family was there for the ceremony, and I was struck by how different we looked in the sea of graduates and family. The Rodriguez family was polished and confident, dressed in designer clothes and carrying themselves with the ease that comes from never having to worry about money. I felt underdressed despite having bought a new outfit for the occasion, and I found myself feeling self-conscious in a way I hadn't experienced in years. After graduation, David and Amanda moved to Austin as planned, where David landed a position with a growing tech company, and Amanda found work with a prestigious marketing firm. They rented a beautiful apartment in one of the city's trendiest neighborhoods, and when I visited them for the first time, I was amazed by how sophisticated their life had become. The apartment was furnished with modern pieces that looked like they belonged in a magazine, and Amanda had decorated it with artwork and accessories that reflected her refined taste. I was happy for them, but I also felt a growing distance that I couldn't quite define. David called less frequently, and when he did, our conversations were shorter and more focused on his work than on the personal details we used to share. Amanda was always polite when I visited, but I sensed that she saw me as an obligation rather than someone she genuinely wanted to spend time with. I told myself it was natural for a young couple to focus on building their life together, and I tried not to take the gradual cooling of our relationship personally. When David called to tell me he was planning to propose to Amanda, I was thrilled for him but also apprehensive about what this would mean for our family dynamic. He had already bought the ring, a stunning diamond that had cost him several months' salary, and he was planning an elaborate proposal at the same restaurant where they had had their first date. I could hear the nervous excitement in his voice, and I found myself remembering Frank's much simpler proposal in our favorite spot by the creek, wondering if David understood that the size of the gesture mattered far less than the depth of the feeling behind it. The proposal was a success, and Amanda's acceptance launched a year of wedding planning that introduced me to a world I had never imagined. The Rodriguez family had definite ideas about how their daughter's wedding should be celebrated, and those ideas involved a level of extravagance that left me breathless. The guest list included 300 people, the venue was a historic mansion in San Antonio, and the budget was larger than what Frank and I had spent on our house. I offered to help with the wedding planning, hoping to find a way to be involved in this important milestone in David's life. Amanda accepted my offer graciously, but it quickly became clear that my role would be limited to tasks that required more time than skill, addressing invitations, assembling favors, and organizing the rehearsal dinner that I had offered to host in Riverside. I felt grateful to be included at all, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that I was being managed rather than genuinely welcomed into the planning process. The wedding itself was everything the Rodriguez family had envisioned: elegant, sophisticated, and flawlessly executed. I felt proud walking down the aisle as David's only family representative, wearing a dress I had splurged on for the occasion and carrying flowers that matched Amanda's bouquet. David looked handsome and happy in his tuxedo, and when he saw Amanda walking toward him in her stunning designer gown, the expression on his face reminded me so much of Frank that I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. The reception was held in a ballroom that had been transformed into something magical, with flowers, candles, and lighting that created an atmosphere of refined romance. I found myself seated at a table with some of David's college friends and their families, all of whom were warm and welcoming. But I couldn't help noticing that I was the only person at the wedding who looked like they had bought their outfit at a department store rather than a boutique, and I felt increasingly self-conscious as the evening progressed. David and Amanda seemed radiantly happy, dancing together as if they were the only people in the room and greeting their guests with genuine warmth and gratitude. I was so proud of my son and genuinely happy for his new wife, but I also felt like I was watching their celebration from a great distance, as if I were looking through a window rather than participating in the festivity. After the wedding, David and Amanda settled into married life in Austin with enthusiasm and optimism. They bought a house in an upscale neighborhood, furnished it with pieces that reflected Amanda's sophisticated taste, and threw dinner parties for their growing circle of friends and colleagues. When I visited them in their new home, I was impressed by what they had accomplished, but also felt increasingly aware of how different our lives had become. It was during one of these visits that I first noticed the subtle changes in how Amanda interacted with me. She was still polite and welcoming, but there was a distance that hadn't been there before, a formality that made me feel more like a guest than family. When I complimented their beautiful home, she thanked me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. When I offered to help with dinner preparation, she assured me that everything was under control and suggested I relax in the living room instead. I told myself that these small interactions didn't mean anything significant, that Amanda was simply adjusting to having a mother-in-law and learning how to navigate our relationship. But as the months passed, I began to notice a pattern of subtle exclusions and dismissals that left me feeling increasingly unwelcome in my son's new life. The foundation was being laid for something I couldn't yet see coming, something that would eventually lead to that horrible moment with the dog food and the complete transformation of our family dynamic. The woman who accepted those early slights with grace and understanding, had no idea that she was enabling a pattern of disrespect that would eventually become so blatant and cruel that it would force her to discover a strength she never knew she possessed. The first time Amanda made a joke at my expense, I brushed it off as nervous humor. We were having dinner at their beautiful Austin home, and I had complimented the elaborate meal she had prepared. "Oh, Maggie," she said with a laugh that seemed just a bit too sharp, "you're so easily impressed. I suppose when you're used to simple home cooking, anything seems gourmet." David chuckled along, though I caught a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. I forced a smile and changed the subject, telling myself that Amanda was just trying to be playful, that I was being too sensitive. But the comments continued, each one delivered with that same bright smile and tinkling laugh that made it impossible to call out without seeming petty. When I admired their new artwork, Amanda would explain how she had to educate David about real art, since he had grown up without exposure to culture. When I mentioned my garden back in Riverside, she would share tips about hiring professional landscapers because some people just don't have the eye for design. Each remark felt like a small paper cut, barely noticeable individually but accumulating into a persistent sting. David seemed oblivious to these subtle digs, or perhaps he chose not to see them. He was so happy in his new life, so proud of his successful career and beautiful wife, that I couldn't bring myself to complain about what might just be my own oversensitivity. After all, Amanda never said anything overtly cruel or insulting. She was just establishing her position as the sophisticated one in the family, the one who knew about fine things and proper ways of living. The pattern escalated gradually over the first year of their marriage. When I visited for David's birthday, Amanda served dinner on china so delicate I was afraid to use it, while making comments about how some people weren't comfortable with formal dining. When I brought a homemade cake, she thanked me sweetly while explaining to their guests that she usually ordered from a French patisserie but wanted to let me contribute something personal. The words were kind, but the tone carried an unmistakable message about who belonged in this sophisticated world and who was merely being tolerated. I began to dread visits to Austin, though I never admitted this to Dave. Each trip left me feeling smaller and more inadequate, as if I were a country mouse who had wandered into a world where I would never truly fit. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Amanda's friends were polished and elegant, speaking casually about their European vacations and designer purchases, while I sat quietly, having nothing similar to contribute to the conversation. I started declining some of their dinner party invitations, claiming that I was too tired from the drive or had other commitments back in Riverside. The financial requests began about 18 months into their marriage, starting small and seeming perfectly reasonable. David called one evening, his voice slightly embarrassed as he explained that Amanda's car had broken down and the repair bill was higher than expected. They had just bought new furniture for their guest room and were stretched a bit thin until his next bonus came through. Could I help them out with $1,500, just temporarily? Of course I could. I had been saving money from my tutoring sessions, and helping my son seemed like exactly what those savings were for. The money was never mentioned again, neither repaid nor acknowledged beyond David's initial grateful thanks. When I asked about it several months later, David seemed genuinely confused, as if he had forgotten about the loan entirely. "Oh right, the car thing," he said vaguely. "I think we paid you back, didn't we? Or maybe Amanda handled it. I'll check with her." But somehow the check never came, and bringing it up again seemed petty and small-minded. More requests followed, each one framed as a temporary emergency or unexpected expense. Amanda needed money for a professional development course that would advance her career. Their air conditioning unit had failed during a heat wave and needed immediate replacement. David's laptop had crashed right before an important project deadline, and he needed a new one to avoid jeopardizing his job. Each request seemed urgent and reasonable, and each time I found myself reaching into my modest savings to help them through their crisis. I told myself that this was what family did for each other, that Frank and I had always prioritized David's needs above our own, and that this was simply a continuation of that pattern. David was building a successful career and a beautiful life with Amanda, and if I could help smooth the occasional rough patch, wasn't that what any loving mother would do? The fact that my own bank account was steadily dwindling seemed less important than ensuring that my son had every opportunity to thrive. Amanda's behavior toward me grew more pointed as time passed and my financial contributions increased. She began making comments about my clothes, suggesting that I might want to update my wardrobe when visiting them in Austin since their neighborhood was quite fashionable. She offered to take me shopping at the upscale boutiques where she bought her own clothes, explaining that she could help me choose age-appropriate pieces that would make me look more put together. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable, but it was delivered with such apparent kindness that challenging it would have made me look ungrateful and difficult. During one particularly memorable visit, Amanda decided to help me with my makeup, insisting that I needed to learn more modern techniques. She spent an hour applying foundation, eyeshadow, and lipstick while explaining how important it was for older women to make an effort with their appearance. When she finished, I looked in the mirror and saw a version of myself that felt foreign and uncomfortable, painted and polished in a way that had nothing to do with who I actually was. But Amanda seemed so pleased with her handiwork, and David complimented the transformation so enthusiastically that I thanked her warmly and wore the makeup through dinner, feeling like I was wearing a mask. The requests for money became more frequent and larger in amount. Amanda needed funds for a new wardrobe for David's company events, explaining that his career advancement depended partly on making the right impression at corporate functions. They wanted to take a vacation to Europe, something that would broaden their cultural horizons and provide networking opportunities with international colleagues. Their mortgage payment had increased due to a rate adjustment, and they needed help covering the difference until David's next promotion came through. Each request was accompanied by detailed explanations of why the money was necessary and how it would benefit David's career, or their future together. Amanda had become quite skilled at presenting these financial needs as investments in David's success rather than simple requests for help. And because I wanted nothing more than for my son to succeed and be happy, I found myself agreeing to larger and larger amounts, even as my own financial security became increasingly precarious. I had to take on additional tutoring students to meet their requests, working evenings and weekends to supplement my teacher's salary. The extra hours were exhausting, but I told myself it was temporary, that once David's career was fully established and they were on solid financial footing, the requests would stop and I could return to a more reasonable schedule. I began putting off necessary repairs on my own house, driving my car longer between maintenance appointments, and cutting back on my own modest pleasures to ensure that I had money available when David called. The social dynamics between Amanda and me grew increasingly uncomfortable as my financial contributions increased. She began treating me less like David's mother, and more like a benefactor who needed to be managed and occasionally indulged. When I visited, she would make a point of showing me their latest purchases, explaining how my help had made them possible. She would thank me effusively for my generosity in front of their friends, in a way that made it clear to everyone present that I was the source of their financial support. These public acknowledgments were humiliating rather than grateful. Amanda would tell their dinner guests how sweet it was that David's mother was so supportive of their lifestyle, how lucky they were to have family who could help them maintain their standard of living. The way she phrased it made it sound like I was a wealthy benefactor choosing to share my abundance, rather than a working teacher stretching her budget to help her son. But challenging her version of events would have required explaining the true extent of my financial sacrifice, which seemed both inappropriate and potentially embarrassing for David. David himself seemed increasingly disconnected from the reality of what my support was costing me. When I mentioned that I was working extra hours to help with their expenses, he would thank me absently while scrolling through his phone or getting ready for another social engagement. When I suggested that maybe they could cut back on some of their expenses to reduce their need for my help, he would agree in principle while explaining why each current expense was absolutely necessary for his career advancement or their social standing. The most painful aspect of this evolving dynamic was watching my relationship with David change. The son who had once called me every few days to chat about his life now contacted me primarily when he needed money. Our conversations became shorter and more transactional, focused on immediate needs, rather than the personal connection we had maintained since Frank's death. When I tried to steer our talks toward other topics, David seemed distracted and eager to end the call, as if spending time talking to his mother was an obligation rather than a pleasure. Amanda began inserting herself more prominently into my relationship with David, often answering his phone when I called and speaking for him about their plans and needs. She would explain that David was busy with important work projects and couldn't talk, but that she could handle whatever I needed to discuss. These conversations left me feeling like I was dealing with David's secretary rather than his wife, someone whose job was to manage his schedule and protect his time from unnecessary interruption. The guest room in their house, which had once been my room when I visited, gradually transformed into Amanda's home office. She explained that they needed the space for her growing marketing consulting business, and that I could sleep on the sofa bed in their living room during my visit. The change was presented as temporary just until they could afford to move to a larger house with a proper guest room, but it felt like another step in my gradual displacement from their lives. During one visit, I overheard Amanda talking to her mother on the phone about their financial situation. She was explaining how they were managing to maintain their lifestyle despite David's modest salary, mentioning that they had family support that helped with expenses. She laughed as she described me as David's sweet mother who loves to spoil us, painting a picture of indulgent generosity rather than sacrifice. The casualness with which she discussed my contributions, as if I were a convenient resource rather than a person making significant sacrifices, was deeply hurtful. I began to question whether I was enabling behavior that wasn't healthy for David or his marriage. Frank had always emphasized the importance of financial responsibility and living within your means, values that seemed increasingly absent from David's current lifestyle. But whenever I tried to raise these concerns with my son, he would become defensive, explaining that their expenses were necessary investments in their future, and that I didn't understand the financial realities of their professional world. Amanda's treatment of me during family gatherings became increasingly patronizing. At David's company Christmas party, she introduced me to her colleagues as David's mother, the elementary school teacher from the small town where he grew up. The way she said it made my profession and hometown sound quaint and limited, as if I were a charming anachronism from a simpler time. When people asked about my work, Amanda would answer for me, explaining that I taught little children and lived in a tiny house in Riverside, as if I were incapable of speaking for myself. The breaking point came during a visit when Amanda decided to redecorate my appearance for a dinner party they were hosting. She insisted that my usual clothing wasn't appropriate for their guests, and proceeded to dress me in one of her own outfits, a black cocktail dress that was too tight and too formal for my taste. She spent an hour doing my hair and makeup, transforming me into a version of myself that felt completely artificial. When their guests arrived, she presented me like a project she had completed, explaining how she had fixed me up for the evening. Standing in their living room, wearing clothes that weren't mine and makeup that felt like a costume, I realized that I had become a source of entertainment for Amanda rather than a respected member of their family. She enjoyed the power dynamic that had developed between us, the ability to shape and control how I appeared in their social world. My financial contributions had given her license to treat me as a subordinate rather than an equal, someone whose appearance and behavior needed her supervision and correction. The final straw came when Amanda suggested that I might want to consider updating my house in Riverside to make it more suitable for entertaining when they visited. She offered to help me choose new furniture and decorations, explaining that my current decor was very dated and didn't reflect well on David's success. The implication that my home, the house where Frank and I had built our life together and where David had grown up, was somehow inadequate or embarrassing was the cruelest cut of all. That night, lying on their sofa bed and staring at the ceiling, I finally acknowledged what I had been trying to ignore for months. I had become a financial resource to be exploited rather than a family member to be cherished. My generosity had been mistaken for weakness, my love for my son had been weaponized against me, and my presence in their lives had been reduced to the money I could provide and the entertainment value of transforming me into someone more acceptable to their social circle. The woman who had once been proud of her simple life and honest work had been gradually convinced that she was inadequate and embarrassing. But lying there in the darkness, surrounded by the expensive furniture and artwork that my sacrifices had helped purchase, I began to remember who I had been before I started measuring my worth by Amanda's standard. Frank would have been horrified to see how I was being treated, and more importantly, he would have been disappointed in me for allowing it to continue. Something fundamental shifted in me that night, a recognition that the path I was on led only to further humiliation and exploitation. I couldn't see yet what the alternative might look like, but I knew that continuing to enable this dynamic would eventually destroy whatever was left of my relationship with David, and whatever remained of my own self-respect. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would change everything, though I had no idea yet how brutal and transformative that confrontation would prove to be. The morning of what I now call the dog food incident started like any other visit to Austin. I had driven down from Riverside the previous evening, carrying a cooler full of David's favorite homemade cookies and a small gift for Amanda, a delicate scarf I had found at the local boutique that I thought would complement her dark hair. I was looking forward to spending time with them, despite the growing tension I felt during these visits. David had mentioned that Amanda was excited to cook a special lunch for me, something new she had been experimenting with. I should have recognized the gleam in Amanda's eyes when she greeted me at the door, the way she seemed almost giddy with anticipation. She was dressed impeccably as always, in a cream-colored sweater and perfectly fitted jeans that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled as if she were heading to a photo shoot rather than spending a quiet Saturday at home. But there was something different about her demeanor, an excitement that seemed disproportionate to the simple family visit we had planned. "Maggie, darling," she said, air-kissing my cheeks in the affected way she had adopted since marrying David. "I'm so thrilled you're here. I've prepared something absolutely special for lunch. It's a new recipe I've been dying to try. Very gourmet, very sophisticated. I think you'll find it quite an experience." The way she emphasized certain words should have been a warning, but I was too pleased by her apparent enthusiasm to read between the lines. David was working in his home office, finishing up a project that couldn't wait until Monday, so Amanda suggested we spend the morning together. She gave me a tour of their latest renovations, pointing out new artwork and furniture that my financial contributions had undoubtedly helped purchase. Each room was magazine perfect, decorated with the kind of careful attention to detail that spoke of both excellent taste and unlimited budget. I complimented everything sincerely, though I couldn't help noticing how cold and impersonal it all felt compared to the warm, lived-in comfort of the home Frank and I had created. Amanda served coffee in delicate china cups, the kind that required careful handling, and made me nervous every time I picked one up. She chattered about her latest marketing projects, dropping names of important clients, and describing business lunches at expensive restaurants. I listened politely, offering appropriate responses, but I found myself feeling increasingly out of place in this world of professional networking and social positioning that had become David's everyday reality. Around noon, Amanda announced that it was time to prepare lunch. She had been building up this meal all morning, describing it as her most ambitious culinary creation yet. She had taken a cooking class from a famous chef, she explained, and this particular dish represented everything she had learned about sophisticated flavor combinations and presentation. She was especially excited for me to try it, because it incorporated techniques that were completely new to her, and she valued my opinion as someone who had been cooking for so many years. The flattery felt genuine, and I was touched that Amanda seemed to want my approval for something that was clearly important to her. Despite our complicated relationship, I genuinely wanted to support her interests and talent. If cooking was becoming a passion for her, I was happy to encourage it, remembering how proud Frank had always been of my own culinary experiments during our early marriage. Amanda shooed me out of the kitchen while she made final preparations, insisting that the presentation was crucial and that she wanted everything to be perfect when she served it. I could hear her moving around, the sound of pots and dishes, the microwave running several times. The aromas coming from the kitchen were rich and complex, unfamiliar but appealing. She seemed to be taking great care with whatever she was preparing, and I found myself looking forward to this elaborate meal she had planned. When David finally emerged from his office, Amanda practically vibrated with excitement. She announced that lunch was ready, and ushered us into their formal dining room, where she had set the table with their finest china crystal glasses and cloth napkins. Candles flickered on the table, and she had even arranged fresh flowers as a centerpiece. The effort she had put into the presentation was impressive, and I felt honored that she had gone to such trouble for a simple family lunch. "I hope you're both ready for something completely unique," Amanda said, her voice bright with anticipation, as she disappeared into the kitchen. "This is going to be an experience you'll never forget, Maggie, I guarantee it." She returned carrying 3 bowls on an elegant serving tray, each one covered with a small plate to keep the contents warm. The presentation was restaurant quality, and I was genuinely impressed by the care she had taken. She placed the first bowl in front of David, the second in front of herself, and the third in front of me, with a flourish that suggested she was unveiling a masterpiece. "This is my interpretation of a rustic country stew," she explained, removing the covers simultaneously. "It's made with the finest ingredients, slow-cooked to perfection, with a blend of spices that I think you'll find absolutely fascinating." The dish looked appetizing enough, thick and rich, with a deep brown color, and chunks of what appeared to be meat and vegetable. The aroma was hearty and savory, though there was something underneath that I couldn't quite identify, something slightly off that my nose couldn't place. I assumed it was just an unfamiliar spice combination, evidence of Amanda's adventurous approach to cooking. David took his first bite and paused, a strange expression crossing his face. He glanced at Amanda, who was watching us both with barely contained excitement, her own spoon untouched in her hand. "It's interesting," he said carefully, taking another small bite. "Very rich." "What exactly is in it?" "Family secret," Amanda replied with a laugh that seemed just a bit too bright. "But Maggie hasn't tried it yet." "Come on, Maggie, don't be shy. I made this especially for you. I want to know what you think of my cooking skill." I lifted the spoon to my mouth and took a generous bite, wanting to show appreciation for the effort Amanda had clearly put into this meal. The flavor was indeed rich and complex, though there was something about the texture that seemed unusual. It was heartier than most stews I had eaten, with a slightly different consistency that I couldn't quite place. The seasoning was heavy, almost masking the primary flavors underneath. "It's very flavorful," I said, taking another bite to be polite. "The spices are quite bold. I can tell you put a lot of thought into the combination." I was being honest in my praise, though something about the meal was making me slightly uneasy. Perhaps it was just that I wasn't accustomed to such exotic flavors, or maybe my stomach was reacting to the richness of the dish. Amanda's face was practically glowing with delight as she watched me eat. "I'm so glad you like it," she said, her voice filled with a satisfaction that seemed disproportionate to the simple act of serving lunch. "It took me a while to get the recipe just right. I wanted something that would be absolutely perfect for you, something that really captured the essence of what I was trying to achieve." I continued eating, though with each bite I became more aware that something was definitely wrong. The flavor wasn't just unusual, it was actively unpleasant in a way that the heavy seasoning almost but not quite covered. My stomach began to feel unsettled, and I found myself having to force down each spoonful while trying to maintain a polite expression. David had stopped eating entirely, setting his spoon down and reaching for his water glass. "Amanda," he said quietly, "what exactly is this made from? It doesn't taste like any stew I've ever had." There was something in his voice that made me look up from my bowl, a note of concern that sent a chill through me. Amanda's smile widened, and for the first time, I saw something cruel and calculating in her expression. "Oh, didn't I mention?" she said with mock innocence. "It's dog food, premium dog food, actually, the really expensive kind." I heated it up and added some spices to make it more palatable. "Maggie's been eating it for the past 10 minutes, and she said it was flavorful." The words hit me like a physical blow. I dropped my spoon with a clatter that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent dining room. My stomach lurched as the reality of what I had been consuming sank in, and I had to press my hand to my mouth to keep from vomiting right there at their beautiful table. The taste that had seemed merely unusual now revealed itself for what it truly was, and I understood why my body had been trying to reject it, even as my mind insisted on being polite. "What?" David's voice was sharp with shock and disbelief. Amanda, please tell me you're joking. Please tell me you didn't actually serve my mother dog food. But Amanda was laughing now, a bright, delighted sound that filled the room with its cruelty. Oh, it's completely harmless, she said, waving her hand dismissively. It's actually quite nutritious. The expensive brands are made with better ingredients than most human food. I just wanted to see if Maggie could tell the difference. And apparently she couldn't. She said it was flavorful and thanked me for the effort I put into it. I sat frozen in my chair, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The woman I had tried so hard to welcome into our family, the wife of my beloved son, had deliberately humiliated me in the most degrading way possible. She had fed me dog food and watched with obvious pleasure as I consumed it, praising her cooking and trying to show appreciation for what I thought was a gesture of inclusion. David was staring at his wife with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of horror and disgust that made his face almost unrecognizable. "How could you do this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How could you humiliate my mother like this? What is wrong with you?" "Oh, come on, David," Amanda replied, still laughing. "It's just a harmless prank. A little joke between family members. Maggie's fine, aren't you, Maggie? No harm done. Besides, she's always going on about how much she appreciates my cooking, so I thought I'd give her something really special to appreciate." The casual cruelty of her words, the way she dismissed my humiliation as harmless fun, finally broke through my shocked paralysis. I stood up from the table so abruptly that my chair nearly tipped over, my hands shaking with a combination of nausea and rage that I had never experienced before. The careful composure I had maintained through months of subtle insults and financial exploitation shattered completely. "Get out," I said, my voice low and steady despite the trembling in my hands. "I want you to pack your things and get out of this house immediately." Amanda's laughter stopped abruptly, and she stared at me with genuine surprise. "Excuse me, Maggie, this is my house. I live here. You can't tell me to leave my own home." "Actually," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, "this house was purchased with money I provided. The down payment, the mortgage assistance, the furniture, the renovations, all of it paid for with my teacher's salary and my retirement savings. So yes, I absolutely can tell you to leave." David was looking back and forth between us like a spectator at a tennis match, his face pale with shock. "Mom, what are you talking about? What money? Amanda, is this true?" Amanda's confident demeanor faltered for the first time, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "David, your mother is being dramatic. Yes, she's helped us financially over the years, but that was her choice. She offered to help and we gratefully accepted. That doesn't give her ownership of our home." "Helped us financially?" I repeated, my voice rising with each word. "I have given you over $40,000 in the past 2 years, $40,000 from my modest teacher's salary and my retirement. Money for car repairs that never happened, for mortgage payments you couldn't afford, for vacations and furniture and clothes. I have worked double shifts and taken on extra students to support your lifestyle while you treated me like an embarrassing relative who needed to be managed and improved." The number hung in the air between us like an accusation. David's face went completely white, and he sank back into his chair as if the weight of this revelation was too much to bear standing. $40,000? He whispered. "Mom, I had no idea it was that much. Amanda told me you were just helping out occasionally, small amounts here and there." "Small amounts?" I turned to face my son directly, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. "David, I have depleted my entire retirement savings to support your lifestyle. I have postponed necessary repairs on my house, driven my car without proper maintenance, and worked myself to exhaustion to provide money for your wife's shopping trips and your expensive dinners. And in return, she has spent months making me feel inadequate and unwelcome in your lives, culminating in this disgusting display of cruelty." Amanda had recovered her composure and was now looking at me with open hostility. "You gave that money freely," she said, her voice cold and calculating. "No one forced you to write those checks. You wanted to help your son succeed, and we allowed you to do that. If you're having buyer's remorse now, that's your problem, not ours. The casual dismissal of my sacrifice, the way she characterized my generosity as something they had allowed me to do, was the final straw. I walked around the table until I was standing directly in front of Amanda, close enough to see the expensive makeup that my money had probably helped purchase. "Pack your things," I said again, my voice deadly calm. "You have 1 hour to get whatever you can carry and leave this house. If you're not gone by then, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing." "You can't do that," Amanda protested, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "David, tell her she can't do that. This is our home." David looked up at both of us, his face a mask of confusion and pain. "Amanda, did you really plan this? The dog food thing? Did you actually plan to humiliate my mother like that?" "It was just a joke," Amanda insisted, but her voice had lost its confident edge, a harmless prank between family members. "I didn't think she would take it so seriously." "You fed my mother dog food," David said slowly, as if he were trying to make sense of words in a foreign language. "You deliberately served her dog food and watched her eat it while you laughed. And you think that's a harmless prank?" For the first time since I had known her, Amanda seemed to realize that she might have miscalculated. She looked between David and me, apparently searching for some way to minimize what she had done or deflect blame for her actions. "David, you know how your mother can. She's always so grateful for everything, so eager to please. I just thought it would be funny to see if she would notice. It wasn't meant to be cruel." The way she characterized my politeness and gratitude as character flaws, the implication that my desire to be included in their lives was somehow pathetic and deserving of mockery, completed my transformation from hurt victim to avenging force. I walked to the phone in their kitchen and began dialing the number for the Austin Police Department. "Wait," Amanda called out, panic finally creeping into her voice. "You don't need to call the police, I'll leave." "But David, you have to understand that this is crazy. Your mother is overreacting to a simple joke. Are you really going to let her throw me out of our house over something so trivial?" David stood up slowly, his movements mechanical as if he were operating underwater. "Amanda, this isn't trivial. What you did today, feeding my mother dog food and laughing about it, that's not a joke, that's cruelty. And if what she's saying about the money is true, if you've been taking advantage of her generosity while treating her like this." He shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. "Fine," Amanda snapped, her mask finally slipping completely to reveal the coldness underneath. "I'll pack a bag and stay at my parents' house until you come to your senses." "But David, you need to think carefully about what you're choosing here. Are you really going to side with your controlling, manipulative mother over your wife? Because that's what this is really about. She's always resented me, always tried to come between us, and now she's using money as a weapon to get what she wants." The accusation that I was the manipulative one, coming from a woman who had just fed me dog food as entertainment, was so absurd that I almost laughed. Instead, I continued dialing the phone number, letting Amanda know through my actions that her time for negotiation had passed. "I'm not choosing sides," David said quietly. "I'm choosing basic human decency. What you did today was wrong, Amanda. Deeply, inexcusably wrong. And I need time to figure out how I'm supposed to move forward, knowing that my wife is capable of doing something like this to someone I love." Amanda's face contorted with fury at this mild rebuke, and I saw the real person underneath the polished exterior for the first time. "Your mother has been trying to sabotage our marriage from day one," she hissed. "She's jealous of what we have, jealous of our success and our lifestyle. She can't stand that you've moved beyond her small-town, small-minded world, and now she's finally found a way to drive a wedge between us." "The only person driving a wedge between you and David is you," I said, holding the phone receiver in my hand like a weapon. "Your cruelty, your entitlement, your complete lack of respect for the people who have supported you. You've shown your true character today, Amanda, and it's ugly." David walked over to where I stood and gently took the phone from my hand. "Mom, let me handle this," he said softly. "Amanda, you need to leave. Now, we'll talk later after I've had time to process what happened here today. But right now, I need you to go." Amanda stared at her husband for a long moment, apparently unable to believe that he was actually supporting me over. When it became clear that he wasn't going to change his mind, she turned on her heel and stalked toward the stairs, her expensive heels clicking angrily against the hardwood floors that my money had helped refinish. "You'll regret this," she called back as she reached the landing. "Both of you. When you realize what you've thrown away, don't come crawling back to me. I won't be so forgiving next time." As Amanda packed her bags upstairs, David and I sat in their living room in stunned silence. The beautiful space that had once seemed so impressive now felt like a monument to my own foolishness. Every piece of furniture and artwork a reminder of how thoroughly I had been used. The taste of dog food still lingered in my mouth, a physical reminder of the depths to which Amanda's cruelty could sink. "I'm sorry," David said finally, his voice barely audible. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea how much money you had given us, and I certainly never imagined that Amanda would do something like this. I feel sick thinking about what just happened." I looked at my son, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The successful young man I had been so proud of suddenly looked very young and very lost, as if he were waking up from a dream to find himself in a nightmare of his own making. "David," I said gently, "I need you to understand something. This marriage, this lifestyle you've built, it's not sustainable. And more importantly, it's not who you really are." Amanda appeared at the top of the stairs with 2 large suitcases, her face set in lines of cold fury. She descended without looking at either of us, her movements sharp and precise as she gathered additional items from around the house. As she reached the front door, she turned back one final time. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and threatening. "I'll be back for the rest of my things. And when I am, you'd better be ready to discuss this situation rationally. I won't be bullied or manipulated by your mother's dramatics." The front door slammed behind her with a finality that seemed to echo through the house. David and I sat in the sudden silence, surrounded by the trappings of a life built on my sacrifices and maintained through my exploitation. The beautiful home that had once seemed like evidence of my son's success now felt like a crime scene. The sight of my final humiliation and Amanda's complete exposure. But as I sat there, tasting the lingering evidence of Amanda's cruelty and looking at the expensive furniture my retirement fund had purchased, I realized something unexpected. For the first time in years, I felt completely, utterly free. The silence that followed Amanda's departure stretched between David and me like a chasm neither of us knew how to cross. I sat in their pristine living room, still tasting the bitter aftermath of humiliation, while my son stared at his hands as if they held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked with mechanical precision, marking time in a house that suddenly felt more like a museum than a home. David was the first to break the silence, his voice cracked and uncertain. "Mom, I need to know the truth about the money. All of it. How much have you really given us? And why didn't you tell me it was putting you in a difficult position?" I took a deep breath, preparing to lay bare the extent of my financial sacrifice. "It started small, David. 1,500 here, 2,000 there, car repairs, emergency expenses. Things that seemed reasonable for a mother to help with, but over the past 2 years, it escalated. The Europe trip was 8,000. The mortgage assistance totaled 16,000. The furniture, the renovations, Amanda's wardrobe expenses for your company events. When I calculated everything last week, the total was $43,700. David's face went ashen. 43,000, he repeated slowly. "Mom, that's not help money. That's life-changing money. That's your entire retirement fund, isn't it?" "Most of it," I admitted. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that once you were established in your careers, the requests would stop. I convinced myself that I was investing in your future happiness. "But I never asked for most of that money," David protested, running his hands through his hair. "I mean, yes, there were a few times when we needed help, but Amanda always handled the financial discussions with you. She said you insisted on contributing, that you wanted to be involved in our success." The manipulation ran deeper than even I had realized. "David, every single request came from Amanda. She would call me directly, explain the emergency, and ask if I could help. She made it sound like these were your ideas, things you were too proud to ask for yourself. David stood up abruptly and began pacing the length of their expensive Persian rug. This doesn't make sense. We both have good jobs. We should be able to afford our lifestyle without needing that kind of help from anyone. Where has all our money been going? I watched my son struggle with the realization that his marriage had been built on deception and exploitation. David, when was the last time you actually looked at your household budget? Do you know what Amanda spends on clothes, on dining out, on the various services she uses? I trusted her to handle our finances, he said quietly. She has a business degree. She's good with numbers. I focused on my work and let her manage our money. I thought that was a reasonable division of responsibility. And Amanda never mentioned how much of your lifestyle was being subsidized by my contributions. David stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. She said you occasionally helped out when we had unexpected expenses. She made it sound like maybe a few $100s here and there. Emergency loans that we always intended to pay back. She said you felt good about being able to help your son succeed. The picture of Amanda's manipulation was becoming clearer with each revelation. She had carefully managed both sides of the equation, taking increasingly large amounts from me while convincing David that my contributions were minimal and voluntary. She had positioned herself as the grateful recipient of a wealthy mother-in-law's generosity rather than the orchestrator of systematic financial exploitation. David, I need you to understand something, I said, choosing my words carefully. I'm not angry about the money itself. If you had needed help and asked me directly, I would have given it gladly. What I can't forgive is the way Amanda has treated me throughout this process. The condescension, the social exclusion, the constant implications that I wasn't sophisticated enough for your work. And now this dog food incident. That wasn't a prank, David. That was a deliberate act of cruelty designed to humiliate and degrade me. David sank back into his chair, his face buried in his hand. I saw the way she talked to you sometimes, the little comments and suggestions about your clothes or your house. I should have said something, but she made it seem like she was trying to help you, like she was being kind by offering advice. Those weren't suggestions, Dave. They were insults dressed up as helpfulness. Amanda has spent 2 years systematically undermining my confidence and making me feel unwelcome in your life. The money was just the vehicle for her cruelty. Today's incident was simply the culmination of a pattern that's been building for months. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see Amanda's name on the screen. The message was brief but loaded with venom. Enjoy your little victory, Mag. David will see what you've really done to our marriage, and when he does, he'll never forgive you for destroying his happiness. I showed the message to David, who read it with growing anger. She's still trying to manipulate the situation, he said, his voice tight with frustration. Even now, after what she did today, she's trying to make this your fault. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Amanda's name appeared on the caller ID, and David gestured for me to answer it. I put the call on speaker so he could hear both sides of the conversation. Maggie, Amanda's voice was crisp and businesslike, as if she were conducting a professional negotiation. I've had time to think about what happened today, and I'm prepared to discuss a reasonable resolution to this situation. There's nothing to discuss, Amanda, I replied calmly. You humiliated me in the most degrading way possible, and you've been taking advantage of my generosity for years while treating me with contempt. I'm done enabling your behavior. Let's not be dramatic, Amanda said, her tone patronizing. Yes, the dog food thing was perhaps ill-considered, but you're blowing it completely out of proportion. As for the money, you gave that freely. No one held a gun to your head and forced you to write those checks. David leaned forward toward the phone, his jaw clenched with anger. Amanda, this is David. I've just learned the extent of what my mother has been contributing to our lifestyle, and I'm horrified. How could you take that much money from her without telling me the real amount? David, sweetheart, Amanda's voice immediately softened, taking on the coaxing tone she used when she wanted something. Your mother is poisoning your mind against me. Can't you see what she's doing? She's using this money as leverage to control our marriage. She's always resented me, always wanted to come between us, and now she's found the perfect weapon. The only person who's been manipulative here is you, David replied, his voice steady despite his obvious anger. You've been lying to both of us, taking money from my mother while treating her terribly, and then you feed her dog food like some kind of twisted joke. What kind of person does that, Amanda? The kind of person who's tired of being controlled by your mother's emotional manipulation, Amanda shot back, her professional facade cracking. She's been using that money to buy influence in our marriage, making herself indispensable so she could criticize my choices and make me feel inadequate. Well, I'm done being the victim of her passive-aggressive games. I listened to Amanda's twisted version of events with amazement. In her mind, she was the victim of my manipulation rather than the perpetrator of systematic exploitation. She had convinced herself that my generosity was actually a form of control, that my attempts to be included in their lives were invasive interference. Amanda, I said, my voice calm but firm, I'm going to make this very simple for you. You have until tomorrow morning to remove all of your belongings from this house. After that, I'm changing the locks and you will no longer be welcome here. You can't change the locks on my house, Amanda protested, but there was uncertainty in her voice. Actually, I can, I replied. David and I had a very illuminating conversation about the financial arrangements that made this house possible. It turns out that my contributions constitute a majority ownership stake in this property. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and my legal position is quite strong. This was a bluff, but Amanda didn't need to know that. I had indeed consulted with a lawyer friend of Frank's several months ago, when I first began to worry about the extent of my financial involvement in David's affairs. The conversation had been hypothetical at the time, but I remembered enough to sound convincing. David, you can't let her do this, Amanda pleaded. This is our home, our life together. Are you really going to let your mother destroy our marriage over a silly prank that got out of hand? David looked at me, then at the phone, his expression resolute. Amanda, what happened today wasn't a silly prank. It was cruel and deliberate humiliation. Combined with what I've learned about your financial deception, it's made me realize that I don't know who you really are. I think we need some time apart to figure out what our marriage actually means. Time apart? Amanda's voice rose with panic. David, you're talking about separation. Over this, your mother has really done a number on you, hasn't she? She's got you thinking that your loyal, loving wife is some kind of monster. My loyal, loving wife fed my mother dog food and laughed about it, David said quietly. She took $43,000 from my mother without telling me the real amounts, all while treating her with contempt and exclusion. That's not the behavior of someone I recognize or respect. Amanda was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was cold and calculating. Fine, if that's how you want to play this, David, then let's play. But understand that I'm not going to make this easy for either of you. I have lawyers too, and I have documentation of every financial transaction. We'll see how this looks when it's all laid out in court. What documentation? I asked, genuinely curious about what Amanda thought she could prove. Bank records showing that Maggie voluntarily transferred money to our accounts, Amanda replied smugly. Email communications where she offered to help with expenses. Evidence that she was an active participant in our financial arrangements, not a victim of exploitation. David and I exchanged glances. Amanda, David said slowly, do you actually have emails where my mother offered to help with expenses? Because I'd be very interested to see those. Another pause. Longer this time. The important thing, Amanda said, deflecting from the question, is that a court will see that Maggie was a willing participant in all of this. She can't claim exploitation after the fact, just because she regrets her generosity. But you can't actually produce evidence that I solicited these contributions, I said, pressing the point. Because what actually happened is that you called me repeatedly requesting money for various emergencies and expenses, all of which you claimed were David's needs or idea. That's your interpretation, Amanda replied, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. My interpretation is that you were eager to be involved in our financial affairs and offered help before I even had a chance to ask. David shook his head in disgust. Amanda, just stop. Every word you say makes this worse. You're caught in a lie, and instead of taking responsibility, you're trying to blame my mother for your own actions. I'm protecting our marriage, Amanda snapped. Something you should be doing instead of letting your mother manipulate you into throwing away everything we've built together. Everything we've built together was paid for with my mother's retirement savings, David replied. And apparently, it was built on a foundation of lies and exploitation. That's not a marriage worth protecting. The silence that followed this statement was heavy with finality. Amanda seemed to realize that her attempts at manipulation were no longer working, that David had seen through her carefully constructed version of events. "You'll regret this decision," she said finally, her voice flat and threatening. "Both of you. When you realize what you've lost, don't expect me to welcome you back with open arms." "I think we'll manage," I said calmly. "David, would you like me to arrange for a locksmith to come tomorrow afternoon?" "Yes," David replied without hesitation. "And Amanda, I'll box up anything you don't collect by tomorrow morning and leave it with the building manager downstairs." Amanda hung up without another word, leaving David and me alone in the house that my money had helped purchase and her cruelty had finally made uninhabitable for her. David walked to the window overlooking their street, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "I feel like such an idiot," he said quietly. "How did I not see what was happening? How did I let this go on for so long?" "You trusted your wife," I replied gently. "That's not idiotic, David. That's what marriage is supposed to be built on." "Amanda exploited that trust. But that's her failing, not yours." "But I should have paid more attention to our finances. I should have noticed that we were living beyond our means, and I definitely should have seen how she was treating you." I joined him at the window, looking out at the upscale neighborhood that had become the symbol of Amanda's ambitions. "David, Amanda is very skilled at manipulation. She managed to convince me that I was voluntarily contributing to your success while simultaneously convincing you that my contributions were minimal. She's had practice at this kind of deception." David turned to face me, his expression serious. "Mom, I want to pay you back. Every penny. I don't know how long it will take, but I'm going to return every dollar she took from you." "David, that money is gone," I said honestly, "and I don't want you to spend the next decade trying to repay a debt that wasn't really yours to begin with. What I want is for you to build a life based on honesty and genuine relationships, not financial manipulation. But you depleted your retirement savings for us, for me. How can I live with that?" I took my son's hands in mine, seeing Frank's gentle nature beneath the confusion and pain of this awful day. "You can live with it by learning from it, by making sure that your next relationship is built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than status and appearance, by remembering that the people who truly love you don't need to be bought or impressed." David nodded slowly, tears gathering in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for not seeing what Amanda was doing, for not protecting you from her cruelty, for letting her take advantage of your love for me." "I know you are," I said softly, "and that's enough for me." As the sun set over Austin, casting long shadows through the windows of the house that would soon belong entirely to David, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Despite the day's trauma, despite the taste of dog food that still lingered in my memory, despite the financial devastation that Amanda's greed had caused, I felt hopeful. The web of manipulation and exploitation that had trapped all of us was finally broken. David was free to discover who he really was without Amanda's influence, and I was free to rebuild my life without the constant drain of supporting their artificial lifestyle. The road ahead would be challenging, but it would be honest in a way that our relationships hadn't been for far too long. Tomorrow, Amanda would collect her belongings and leave our lives forever. Tomorrow, David and I would begin the process of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of truth rather than financial obligation. Tomorrow, I would start planning a future that belonged entirely to me. But tonight, we sat together in the gathering darkness, two people who had been manipulated and deceived but who had finally found the courage to face the truth and choose something better. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my Riverside home, preparing dinner for David and James Patterson, the cardiologist I had been quietly dating since spring. The house felt alive again in ways I had forgotten were possible. Fresh flowers from my revived garden sat on the windowsill, and the smell of Frank's favorite pot roast filled the air with warmth and memory. David had moved back to Riverside after Amanda's departure, taking a position with a local tech startup that paid less than his Austin job but offered him peace of mind he hadn't realized he was missing. The divorce proceedings had been swift once Amanda discovered that her legal position regarding the house was far weaker than she had assumed. My financial contributions, documented through bank records and Amanda's own demanding text messages, had indeed given me substantial claim to the property. Rather than engage in a prolonged legal battle, Amanda had accepted a settlement that gave her enough money to restart her life elsewhere, provided she signed documents acknowledging the financial exploitation and agreeing never to contact either David or me again. She had moved to Dallas, where her parents helped her establish a new marketing consultancy, far from the wreckage of her manipulative schemes. The transformation in David had been remarkable to witness. Free from Amanda's constant pressure to maintain an image he couldn't afford, he had rediscovered the gentle, thoughtful young man Frank and I had raised. He had sold the Austin house, using the proceeds to pay down debts and establish a modest emergency fund. He lived now in a small apartment downtown, furnished with pieces from our family home, and second-hand finds that he refinished himself, just as Frank had taught him years ago. "Something smells incredible in here," James said as he arrived with a bouquet of sunflowers and a bottle of wine. At 62 he was distinguished and kind, with silver hair and laugh lines that spoke of a life well lived. We had met when I brought David to the emergency room during a panic attack he experienced shortly after Amanda's departure, and James had shown such gentle care for both of us that I found myself looking forward to our subsequent conversation. David arrived shortly after, carrying groceries for the breakfast he planned to cook for us the next morning. These Sunday dinners had become a cherished tradition, a way of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. We talked about everything now, from David's work challenges to my tentative exploration of life beyond teaching, to James's stories from the hospital. Over dinner, David shared news that both excited and concerned me. "I've been offered a position in Denver," he said carefully. "It's a great opportunity working on medical software that could really make a difference, but I wanted to talk to you about it before making any decision." The old me would have panicked at the thought of David moving so far away, would have tried to find ways to keep him close or make myself indispensable to his decision-making process. The new me recognized this as exactly the kind of conversation a healthy parent-child relationship should include. "Tell me about the position," I said, genuinely interested in his enthusiasm rather than focused on my own fears about distance. David's face lit up as he described the company's mission and the innovative projects they were developing. James asked thoughtful questions about the technical aspects, and I found myself proud of the intelligent, passionate man my son had become when freed from the constraints of Amanda's ambitions. "It sounds like an amazing opportunity," I said when he finished. "When would you need to start?" "That's the thing," David replied. "They want me to start in 6 weeks. I know it's sudden, and I hate the idea of leaving you right when we've gotten close again." James reached over and squeezed my hand gently. "Maggie's building quite a life for herself here," he said with a smile. "Between her volunteer work at the Literacy Center and our weekend adventures, I think she'll manage just fine." He was right. The months since Amanda's departure had been filled with rediscovery and growth. I had finally retired from teaching, using my pension and the small amount David had insisted on repaying to live comfortably while pursuing interests I had neglected for decades. I volunteered at the Community Literacy Center, helped elderly neighbors with technology challenges, and had even started taking art classes at the community college. "David," I said, reaching across the table to touch his arm, "I want you to take this job. I want you to build a life based on your own dreams and ambitions, not on proximity to me or anyone else. That's what real love looks like, supporting each other's growth even when it's difficult." Relief and gratitude flooded David's expression. "I was hoping you'd say that, but I wasn't sure. After everything that happened with Amanda, I felt like I owed you something more than just moving on with my life." "You don't owe me anything," I said firmly. "What you can give me is the knowledge that you're happy and healthy and building meaningful relationships with people who value you for who you really are." As we cleaned up after dinner, David pulled me aside. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I've been seeing some." Her name is Rachel, and she's a nurse at the hospital where I went for my panic attacks. She's nothing like Amanda, quiet and genuine and kind. She knows the whole story about what happened, and she thinks you're amazing for standing up for yourself the way you did. I smiled, remembering my own journey toward new love. I'd like to meet her, I said simply. When you're ready to introduce us. Actually, David said with a shy grin, I was hoping she could come to dinner next Sunday, if that's okay with you and James. The easy way he included James in our family planning touched me deeply. David had accepted my new relationship with grace and enthusiasm, understanding that my happiness didn't diminish my love for him or Frank's memory. Later that evening, after David and James had gone home, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea, looking out at the garden Frank and I had planted so many years ago. The roses were blooming magnificently, better than they had in years, as if they too had benefited from being freed from neglect and allowed to thrive. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor Betty, asking if I wanted to join her morning walk group. Another message from James, thanking me for a lovely evening, and confirming our plans to visit the art museum next weekend. A third from David, sharing a photo of the Denver skyline with the caption, "My next adventure." The contrast with my old life was striking. Instead of anxiously waiting for calls requesting money or tolerating visits where I felt unwelcome and inadequate, my phone now brought me invitations and connections with people who valued my company for its own sake. The dog food incident, as traumatic as it had forced me to confront truths I had been avoiding for too long. Amanda's cruelty had shattered the illusion that my financial sacrifice was buying me love and respect, revealing instead how thoroughly I had been exploited and manipulated. But from that devastation had come unexpected gifts. David and I had rebuilt our relationship on honesty rather than obligation. I had discovered that life at 58 could still hold surprises, adventures, and even romance. Most importantly, I had learned that setting boundaries and demanding respect wasn't selfish or cruel. It was essential for any healthy relationship. The woman who had quietly endured months of subtle humiliation before being fed dog food like a pet would have been horrified by her own assertiveness that day, but that same assertiveness had freed all of us from a toxic dynamic that was poisoning every relationship it touched. Now, as I prepared for bed in the house that was truly mine again, I felt grateful for Amanda's final act of cruelty. It had forced me to find a strength I never knew I possessed, and to build a life worth living on my own terms. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be exactly what you needed to discover who you really are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.